Welcome to the WanderLearn-Podcast. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I interview Robert Hahn, who is a avalanche forecasting meteorologist. And so as a result, I get to ask him and bombard him with a bunch of questions about how to avoid and survive an avalanche. In fact, he even survived one himself, a personal story. That's what we start off the podcast with. At the 50-minute mark, we shift over to another crazy survival story in the Himalayas that he endured. And at the 70-minute mark, we talk about Africa and his time at the Peace Corps in Uganda and other places that he's visited as well. This podcast is sponsored by Tour Radar. Do you want to take a life-changing travel adventure, but either hate planning or you don't know where to start? Tour Radar is a trusted online marketplace that helps you find, compare, and book multi-day tours that will expand your horizons through life-enriching experiences. And right now, WanderLearn listeners can visit Tour Radar for a chance to win $1,000 in travel credits. So just go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn to have a chance to win $1,000 in travel credits on Tour Radar. We also like to draw attention to the Steelman Foundation as well as the Health Access Sumbawa.
I went to undergrad on the East Coast, actually. I grew up in Boston, went to Williams College in Western Massachusetts, and continued...
Wait a second. Hold on. Stop. I went to Amherst College. You fucking... Oh, I'm going to strangle you now. I already hate you. I'm just kidding. For those who are listening, Amherst and Williams are arch rivals. Kind of like, they are the Harvard versus Yale or the Stanford versus, I don't know, Berkeley. I don't know. They're arch enemies. So Robert and I already have an animosity that's just immediately erupted. Just kidding.
I've managed to forgive you, Francis, because we share a lot of other things in common.
Okay. Yes, we're both good looking. Go on.
Right. So yeah, I went. I studied geology at Williams College, and then made the journey out to the West Coast for grad school.
Wait a second. Sorry, I'm interrupting you again. But geology at Williams College now, doesn't it have a pretty good geology department because you guys are out in the middle of fucking nowhere?
I do think that it is a good geology department. It's small, like a lot of programs at our respective schools, but it has a great focus on teaching, and there are a lot of opportunities. There's actually an unopened ocean in the Connecticut River Valley where you have oceanic basalts. There are metamorphic rocks that are trending up and down the Appalachians that you can study of varying ages. There's marble in the Williams Valley, so there are plenty of different rocks to look at. It's not as exposed as you might find in a place like Montana. So,
so Montana is like the hotbed of geology for some students.
For structural geology.
For lazy people who don't want to get out their little pickaxe and actually do some
Exactly.
work.
Yeah, if you want to just see the geology exposed and understand it, it's much easier to understand in a place where there aren't trees.
Right, and I imagine like the Grand Canyon is like Nirvana.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, for sedimentary rocks, yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's get right into, we'll get more into your background before, because I know that you went off and did some, your master's degree in Washington State at UW, I think, at University of Washington. But I wanted to dive right into your avalanche story, because right now you study avalanches, and you somehow, despite being an expert on them, or maybe because you're an expert on them, managed to get yourself into an avalanche. Tell us the story about how that happened.
You start thinking you understand how the weather contributes to the snowpacks and how the snow stratigraphy might increase or decrease your danger.
Hold on, sorry. Snow stratigraphy or something? Did I misunderstand that?
The snowpack becomes sort of like rocks in a way. I mean, you're dealing with one mineral, H2O, and it falls in various forms. It can fall as various snow crystal types. It can form ice layers. It can form, and each of these layers within the snow is a different density. It has different properties of cohesion and sometimes you get a heavier slab over a weaker layer, and in the middle of the winter, that's what you worry about. And these layers can persist into the springtime, and that's what happened this year in 2008. We had a particularly cold winter, and so some of these layers that were concerning in the middle of the winter were deep in the snowpack, and when the temperature started to warm up, we had one weekend in April when the temperature in Seattle got up to 70 degrees, which has become more common in recent springs. But in that particular spring, because it had been so cold, those cold layers were still intact. And that first weekend, there were a number of avalanches. And I knew at the time that generally there's a spring transition where the snowpack, the snow crystals round, we call it. So they round and they become more stable with time during the spring. So in my head, that transition had occurred over a single weekend, and that was somewhat wishful thinking. It takes more time than a single weekend. So there was that first warm weekend, and then there were 4 or 5 cooler days during the week, and then the next weekend, the same thing happened. It got up to 70 degrees in Seattle, and I went up to Washington Pass, which had just opened. The highway had just opened. It's some of the higher elevation, more alpine accessible skiing in the state, and there's a particular tour that had been highly regarded called the Birthday Tour that my friends and I wanted to ski. So we set out early in the morning.
And what mountain was the nearest prominent mountain that was nearby? I'm just trying to picture where this is exactly.
Yeah, so it's a circumnavigation of Liberty Bell, basically.
Okay.
There's it's a sort of a famous climbing, a group of rock spires. There's not a mountain that's particularly prominent there, but
okay.
These mountains are around 7,000 feet. I would say the biggest factor, they're usually, when you debrief an avalanche incident, there are often factors that contribute to it, and one of those factors was that I was feeling sick that day. I think I'd gotten
So you're saying that basically when you do like a post-analysis of how did we get caught in this avalanche, you often find that people, not often, but I guess sometimes find that people are either disoriented, sick, weak, thirsty, just not thinking straight.
There are often a number of contributing factors.
Human factors, I suppose.
Human factors, exactly. They're usually human and environmental factors that contribute to it, but
what's interesting is that the human factor that I've always heard of is, of course, the human actually stepping on the fucking snow and setting off the avalanche as their vibrations and all that stuff, or sometimes just even yelling and screaming across hey dude, over here, that kind of stuff might be enough to kind of do it. But that's a human factor, a physical human factor. What you're talking about is a kind of psychological or non-physical factor that can also impact whether or not you get caught in an avalanche, right?
Right. The psychological factors are generally what we refer to as human factors in the industry. So the psychological factors are often related to group dynamics, and where I bring in the fact that I was not feeling well is that it caused me not to communicate with my group in the same way. It caused me to question, I guess to take more of I'm going along with this role rather than a proactive role on that particular day, and so you
were basically more passive.
I was more passive. Normally, you as you approach avalanche terrain, you start having discussions with your group. What do you think about the hazard here? What what do you think about this cornice that is overhanging the slope? Or what do you think about the change in the snow that you're feeling under your feet? Should we dig a snow pit? Should we take a look at what the layers are like in the snowpack? And we didn't have any of those.
But were you the only expert in the group?
My point was I was not actually an expert at the time. And even to this day, I would not consider myself an expert in snow and avalanche safety. For instance, I do work with people who I would consider at that level. I'm still approaching that level.
Got it. Okay. What at that point? How much training had you had? Had you had any training, or were you just as dumb as me?
No, I'd had a level 1 awareness course. So I you take a course, you gain some experience. I would not consider myself a novice. I would have considered myself an expert backcountry skier, but my avalanche awareness was still slightly behind that in experience and probably also in training. So
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's true of a lot of backcountry users who, they're probably putting a lot more time into their sport than they are into their training, right? So they become an expert more quickly in that activity. So anyway,
so get into the moment when it actually, like right before it happened. What were you doing? And so you were not totally with yourself. You weren't questioning the group. You weren't saying, "Hey, dude, should we think about this a little bit more instead of just boldly going here?" What was it on? Were you on a steep slope at the moment when you witnessed this?
Yeah. So we changed aspects, and we were going down a moderate south-facing slope, full sunshine, middle of the day. It felt like it was beach weather. It was really warm, and we decided to deviate from the path that most of the other skiers were taking, and that got us into some terrain that we call it rolled over, so it became steeper. And
so it went from, let's say, 10-degree slope to a 30-degree slope?
I would say it went from maybe a 30 to 35-degree slope to something more like 35 to 40.
Got it. Okay.
So, that's generally the prime triggerable pitch for avalanches. And I was the first to ski that particular slope. I questioned my friends about why we were trying to traverse into this unknown terrain, and they said, "Well, why don't you go?
You go first, dude. Yeah. You go first. Why are we doing this? Well, I don't know. What the fuck are you doing? You go first, Robert." And you're like, "Okay, guys, I'll do it." Even though I'm the only guy questioning this, I'm going to be the first one to throw my ass out there. So how many were you again? How many? The total group size?
We were 3.
Did you have avalanche beacons or any of that kind of stuff?
We had shovel beacon and probe. So basically I was on telemark skis at the time. And I remember taking the particular turn that triggered the avalanche and just feeling myself as if I was falling over. And in my head, I was questioning, am I just so weak today that I can't pull off a telemark turn? And I was really disappointed at myself. And then I realized I was caught in what was like a whitewater slurry. I sort of rode on the surface for several seconds, I would say, and then I washing machined, meaning that I went head over heels about 3 rolls, each time popping my head above the surface before the slide slowed, and I ended up fortunately on the surface, kind of dazed and snow blinded, because my sunglasses were the one thing that had went missing. So,
well, you can't become snowblind just so quickly. Isn't snowblindness something that normally comes over time?
I guess that isn't the technical term. Mainly, I was squinting profusely.
Got it. Right.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. Right. Yeah, because snowblindness is when you don't have a sunglasses for many hours or days or whatever it is, and eventually, slowly but surely, you just become blind. That's happened to many explorers and many people who didn't have glasses. But I understand what you mean. It was just so freaking bright out there that you couldn't see anything. But you said, well, I might be kind of blinded here, but at least I'm alive and I'm breathing.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And your friends were like a few hundred meters above you, I imagine.
They were, yeah. So they gingerly went down my avalanche path. There was a narrow swath. This was not a slab. It was what we call a loose wet avalanche, I believe. At the time, we didn't use the current avalanche problem types, so I don't believe it was a wet slab. I don't think I even have a photo of it. I just wanted to get out of there. So, yeah, but, it was a narrow path. The safest route down for my friends was so that they didn't trigger a nearby avalanche, because presumably those same instabilities were present next to that path. Yeah. And so they reached me, and there wasn't a lot of there was no search or rescue that might accompany a more serious incident. Fortunately, I hadn't hit any rocks or trees. There was no trauma. We just had to ski out.
Right. And so immediately when you got up, people you could wave to your friends, dude, I'm still alive, that kind of stuff. So they immediately didn't have to like barrel down through the slope to get you. They just gingerly went down and say, okay, Robert's fine. He hasn't broken any legs or done anything like that. Were there trees further down the slope?
I was almost at the valley bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. So the biggest hazards I passed on my way down. Yep.
Okay. And a lot of people describe it as kind of like surfing on water or that kind of stuff. And you're almost kind of, and they tell you that when you're you're supposed to kind of like swim. You're supposed to try to like swim. It's just such a strange concept. I've never been caught in an avalanche. So I don't really know how that feels, but is that correct? That's what you've heard. I guess, did you feel like you could do any of that? The way you described it, you're like somersaulting 3 times on your way down. It seems like you had almost basically no control over yourself. But in theory, do you think, looking back on it, had you been a little bit more prepared or expecting it, you could have somehow swam to the top, so to speak?
I would say maybe 80 or 90% of the time I was, head up, which is maybe not typical of a larger avalanche. I think, I think there were a couple of factors here. One was that the nature of the avalanche was more of a wet slurry than it was for a dry snow avalanche, which becomes a liquid because of friction. In this case, the snow temperature was already at 32 Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius, and it really behaved much closer to actual whitewater than I've never been in a cold snow avalanche, so I can't actually compare it.
A cold snow avalanche?
Right. So midwinter, oftentimes the temperature is below 32 Fahrenheit, and so what enables the snow to behave in and to move so quickly is that it actually the friction between the snow grains actually liquefies it, and so that's what's actually really dangerous. One of the things that's really dangerous about a cold snow avalanche is that it moves down the slope as a liquid, and then when it reaches stasis at the bottom, when it stops, it suddenly freezes up solidly. And so if you are under the surface, you're trapped, and you just you have maybe a very limited air pocket, and that
right.
limit, yeah.
And you have minutes to live effectively, because unless you have one of those things that expand and give you some air breathing space, and of course you have other people looking after your ass.
Right. So even the things that expand, they're usually expanding around your head, which is good, but sometimes not in front of your face, which is kind of where you need that airspace. But I do now have an avalanche airbag pack, and what that's often good for is just staying towards the surface. Its buoyancy will help keep you afloat in those cold snow avalanches, and also in a spring avalanche as well. And they're also good at protecting you from trauma,
from like head blast or that kind of stuff. That physical trauma. Exactly.
If you hit a tree, from a certain orientation, you might hit the airbag rather than.
How much do those things cost, by the way?
Close to $1,000.
What the fuck? Really? Holy cow! $1,000 for those little airbag things for avalanches? Really?
I believe I actually inherited mine, so I didn't do the shopping myself, but yeah, they're not cheap.
Wow. Okay, I'd rather be stuck in the avalanche, frankly. Save myself $1,000 and die later.
Unfortunately, a lot of backcountry skiing gear is not cheap. So
yeah, no kidding. So, has there been any other time when you actually were caught? Not caught in an avalanche, but witnessed one, either from like you set one off on purpose, like you always see those guys taking dynamite and blowing up things for nature channels?
That area of Washington Pass has not been friendly to me in the avalanche department, but I was up there with 4 others, and our group, one of the members of our group triggered we call it a size 2 avalanche. It was a cold snow avalanche. He was fortunate because it was shallow. It was shallow enough that while it knocked him off his feet, there were some small larch trees, and his skis were actually caught, and he was not pulled down slope, and so he basically fell over and was self-recovered.
Wow. He almost like self-arrested himself, if you will. His skis got just stuck, basically, and kind of like arrested him. That's what I'm, just like an ice axe might arrest you.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this case, it was a cold slab avalanche. And we, there were errors made in that. I wrote up the. Mm-hmm.
I wonder what the percentage of people who actually are caught in avalanches who actually survive. Do you have any idea? I mean, that's probably a hard statistic to find, but it sounds like maybe majority of the people who get caught in avalanches survive.
Yeah, I think that's a tough statistic because, avalanches can range in size drastically, and I think you have to.
You said you talked about level 2. How many levels are there? 5.
So
okay, and 5 is the worst.
5 is the worst. Yeah.
Okay. That's when the whole fucking mountain is falling on you.
Right. Size 1 is not big enough to injure or kill a person. Size 2 is, but basically there's size descriptors for each of these, and they go up exponentially. So, the difference between a size 1 and size 2 is a factor of 10.
Wow. So it's just like the Richter scale in earthquakes.
Yep. Right. So, so you're...
is that because you geologists like the logarithmic scale? Is that what it is?
I think it's that some of these avalanches are huge and some of these are really small, and yeah, I guess so. I guess that's true. But
because you could forget the logarithmic scale and just say that's 1,000, that's 10,000. But I guess logarithmic makes it cooler. It makes it easier, fewer numbers to write. Maybe geologists are fundamentally lazy people. They don't like to write a lot of zeros.
Probably everyone is.
Good point. Good point. So wow. So you witnessed this guy. He fell a little bit, and then, but you haven't. I mean, I know, Robert. There's no answer to this question about percentage of people who survive avalanches, but could you say that the majority do? That's just, when I say majority, that's 51% or more.
Yeah, I would say the majority do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you have no idea whether it's. But if I said 90% do, would that be? You wouldn't feel comfortable saying 90% survive?
I think there's a huge issue of reporting, right? Like,
of course. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I mean, nobody reports that you survived. Not nobody, but few people report that they survived an avalanche.
Well, at the same time, a lot of people don't report that they were in a size 1 avalanche because they don't consider it worth reporting. So, because that's not an avalanche that's big enough to injure or kill you, basically. And so the question is, when you say I was caught in an avalanche, do you mean I survived an avalanche? Did you survive an avalanche of a certain size or greater? Because of this issue of underreporting at the low end of the scale, I just think it's a really hard question to answer.
Got it. And you survived a type 1.
The one I would say it was a size 2.
Okay, also a size 2. Okay. Yeah, the most I ever, when I was on the Continental Divide Trail, and there was times when I would walk along a slope, and then all of a sudden the slope would crumble, and I would just sink down like, I don't know, a few meters down. It's not even an avalanche. Or I would see it. I would see the slope. I would see the slope not collapse, but just keep dribbling down the slope. I guess it wasn't steep enough. Maybe it was only 20 degrees or something like that. So it just the snow would continue falling down, but I wouldn't. I would just witness the snow just kind of creating a mini avalanche, if you call it that. That's probably like a type 0 or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. that's in the springtime. That's pretty common, where you get roller balls forming in the sun's heat, and that's a precursor to instability. Right.
Before we move on to other subjects, I'm fascinated by the avalanches. That's why I was starting off with that question. But before we move on to other things, any things that people who are watching or listening to this should they think about, and tips? Obviously, you mentioned one at the beginning, which is when your slope is around 35 degrees or so, that's when you should start waking up and paying attention.
Well, I think, I think one of the biggest things that we try to stress is that in the U.S. we're generally fortunate because we have these Forest Service avalanche centers that are putting out public bulletins, and so one of the first things to do is actually to check your local avalanche bulletin or forecast, and
is that something you do, by the way? Part of your job right now, is that what you do?
Yes, I'm part of a team that puts out these products, both on the mountain weather side and on the avalanche side. I write forecast zones.
Is this you're working on behalf of the government, I suppose, right? Okay, got it.
So,
okay.
So we have a great resource, and a lot of people are using that product. There are some people who aren't aware of that product and should be aware of that product.
What's the website for that?
www.avalanche.org will get you to a map of all of the Forest Service avalanche centers, and you can click on the area of interest. More locally here, I work for the Northwest Avalanche Center, which has its own website, www.nwac.us.
Sorry, repeat that one more time.
www.nwac.us.
Got it. Okay. Very good. And so one mistake that people make is that they don't, before they go on their hiking or backcountry ski trip, is that they don't check in.
Right, they don't
avalanche.org.
for the latest conditions, and that's critical to planning. I think, the next piece of advice would be really to, consider consider your hazard in the terrain that you're going to be in relative to what's being talked about in the forecast. If the forecast says you might want to avoid terrain steeper than 35 degrees today, ask yourself, look at the map, say, am I going to be exposed to terrain that's 35 degrees or greater, either above me or on the slopes that I'm crossing? So a lot of it is communication, right? Because, your partner might say, well, wouldn't it be sweet to go up that mountain? And, so you always have these, you're going to always have these conversations. And one of the tips that I learned from a colleague this year is really, you don't add terrain on a tour. You actually, you have a plan, and the only thing you're going to do you might have several options with that plan, but the only thing you're going to do is subtract terrain. You might say, this terrain is off limits for me today. It's not, we don't think it's safe. And at no point in the day do you say, well, it seems pretty stable today. Let me put that terrain back in play and let us tour over to that area. So,
what's the most dangerous activity in the snow? Would you say that the one that's most likely to set off avalanches is it mountaineering, like you're going up with ice axes, crampons, that kind of stuff? Those guys who are climbing pretty steep slopes. The second one is just regular hikers who are also climbing over snow, that kind of stuff, but they tend to not have as much the ropes and that glacier travel stuff. And the third category is people who are snowboarders or skiers. I don't know if there's in the fourth category, but those are the three that come to mind. Of the three, which is the one that is most likely to set off an avalanche?
I would guess that your answer is actually mountaineering. But to set off an avalanche,
like if you're going up Mount Rainier, if you're going up, Mount Rainier is a Seattle, is a mountain right by Seattle. I'm sure there's got plenty of avalanches there.
Again, the type of mountaineering that you're doing, big mountain mountaineering, your odds are significantly higher for risk of a lot of different things, including avalanches. The types of mountaineering that people are doing at lower elevations, I think your odds, particularly if you're in the late spring or summer, might be lower. But there's this. No,
but if you're a winter mountaineer, I remember this one Japanese guy. He wanted to be the first person to summit Denali, which is the tallest mountain in North America, in Alaska, and he wanted to summit it in the middle of winter, and he did, by the way, but he never came back.
Right. I don't.
So I imagine winter mountaineering is really where you're asking for trouble. Maybe not, or is it spring?
Yeah, I haven't given a lot of thought specifically to winter mountaineering. I think your exposure is higher for a longer period of time. Skis or snowboards or actually snowmobiles can be a pretty effective trigger for an avalanche, because effectively you're able to cut off a chunk of a slab.
Right, that's what I was thinking. That's what I thought, that skiing would, just because you're so much heavier. But you're right, snowmobiling, I guess, would be the fourth category, and that's really dangerous. But on the other hand, I imagine that a lot of snowmobilers, because you have that sheer power and speed, that you can either outrace or, get out of harm's way somehow. I don't know if that's true either.
I think, there is probably some truth to that, but there are certain days when the size of the avalanche and the reactivity of the snowpack is such that that avalanche, once triggered, is going to propagate so widely that even if the snowmobile is moving pretty quickly, it only has a few seconds to get off the slab before the slab breaks up and becomes this slurry that I was describing earlier. And we actually had a number of snowmobile fatalities the winter before last. And I think that kind of, it drilled home in the eyes of the snowmobile community the need to really consult our products and to gain more training and awareness. So yeah, I would I think this is another case where the statistics, the jury's still out on a lot of those questions, and I don't have a great answer for it.
Has that experience changed you? The one where you got caught in an avalanche, and of course all your study. Now, imagine because you're studying avalanches, you become more confident of maybe about your knowledge, and because you're reporting on them. But on the other hand, I think maybe you become like a police officer. A police officer, I think, looks at the world in a very negative light often, and just thinks to, look out, there could be criminals everywhere, anywhere. Versus somebody like me, I just think the whole world is great and there's no problems out there but I don't deal with crime and criminals every single day of my life. And so because maybe you're looking at avalanches all the time and thinking about them and all that stuff, you have this kind of diluted impression that they're happening all over the place. And so therefore you're scared shitless about going out there and actually experiencing the backcountry. Do you see what I'm getting at? How does this impact your personal view of the world, and have you been more reticent to get out there in the backcountry?
In my 20s and early 30s, I would have called myself a risk taker. I made some decisions at times that I was just going to accept the risk in the terrain that I was in, and the main reason was because I fancied myself as a bit of a steep skier, somebody who was willing to ski some lines that most people weren't willing to ski. And there's a certain amount of risk that you have to take. You generally choose conditions that you hope that you've chosen conditions that are perfect for the terrain that day. You hope that the snow is consolidated, but you know that if an avalanche occurs, the outcome is not going to be good. And you also know that one mistake, making a turn, and the outcome is really not going to be good either. So I think one of the things that changed for me is as I became a professional in the industry, and part of that happened this year with the avalanche that occurred on December 30th of 2018. My boss drilled into me the fact that there are consequences professionally for me and also for our forecast team when a member of my party gets into an avalanche. And I started to view things a little bit differently. That I have to be practicing as I preach. And if I'm telling people to stay off terrain greater than 35 degrees, I shouldn't be then skiing that same terrain. And that's basic common knowledge, and I think it's part of growing up. So
yeah, and also part of lowering testosterone level. I'm a big believer that as testosterone levels men change as their testosterone levels decline, and they become less fucking stupid, because we're really dumb people when we're like 19 years old. I mean, incredibly dumb. If you look at the YouTube videos about all the stupid shit of people doing like parkour and just breaking their ankles, I mean, it's just like that's all explained by testosterone. It's like you almost never see women doing as stupid things that men often do, young men do. It's just incredible. It's the young men who are the suicide bombers, it's just incredible. It's all testosterone. They're the ones who are flying off slopes that they shouldn't be on, etc. Anyway, so we become wiser as we get older. I'd like to think so, yeah, but I think probably by we're 80 years old, we still have more testosterone than a 19-year-old girl, but who knows? So we're still pretty stupid at 80, but who knows what the reality is. But any other tips? I imagine an avalanche beacon is essential, and traveling with a buddy and not going out there solo is
Yes,
another
shovel,
key.
beacon, probe are essential.
And to have a shovel with you.
Right. I mean, you want your partner to be able to dig you out, and you want to be able to dig him or her out if they get into a slide, because the over under is about 30 minutes.
What does that mean, over under?
Oh, if you are if you are buried in an avalanche, beyond 30 minutes, your survival rate is less than 50%.
You still have as high as 50? I would think that 30% after 30 minutes. Well, I guess you could, as long as you have breathing area, you'll just be cold. So what's the record? Maybe not the record, but what's like the high end? Like somebody staying there for 2 hours?
Yeah, I think 2 hours is probably about the max
that anybody's ever survived.
I'm sure the number is higher than that, but that I've heard of, it's an hour and a half to 2 hours would probably be really long. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And then they come out with frostbite, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe because you're underneath snow, there's a certain level of insulation there that maybe
there is.
And there's no wind.
Yeah. The frostbite is not usually the biggest thing that's reported. I think you are somewhat insulated. Yeah. I mean, it's usually trauma or asphyxia.
Right. So if you only could take one thing with you, Robert, if I said, no, you can't have the airbag, what's that thing called?
The Avalanche airbag pack.
Okay. Yeah. Airbag. Okay. So you cannot have, you can only take one thing with you. Would you take the avalanche beacon? So you can't even take a shovel, for example. So what would be, and assuming you're with one other partner, you're not by yourself. So if you could only take one item to help you prevent an avalanche, what would it be? Would it be the beacon itself?
I would take the beacon.
Yeah, because you can always shovel with your hands if you.
I would take the. Yeah.
Because you got a great shovel, but you don't know where to fucking shovel, then you're kind of screwed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think
you don't know.
Yeah,
I would
take the beacon. I do think, if somebody's buried more deeply, without the probe, you're not gonna know exactly where they are, and without the shovel, you're not gonna be able to extract them. But at least if they're buried very shallowly, you have a chance of being able to dig them out. So
right.
I was actually, I actually don't. I don't ski inbounds at a ski area without a beacon now, because I was at Snowbird ski resort on a day when there was an inbound avalanche fatality, which is incredibly rare.
What's that called?
And it was
inbound.
Inbound. So it was within the ski area boundary. They had opened some pretty difficult terrain off of a mountain called Baldy, and a skier had been, every once in a while they miss controlling a little spot, or they didn't anticipate that the slide would be big enough to injure or kill someone, and the ski patrol calculated it wrong. The person was buried, and the patrol was asking, anyone who had shovel, beacon, probe to go and start probing. So in that case, actually, they needed people with probes rather than beacon specifically to do a probe line. So yeah.
And did you find the guy?
No, that was actually, it resulted in a fatality. I was not useful because I didn't have my probe on that particular day. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So the guy died.
The guy died. Yep.
Rough. Oh, that's really rough. Have you heard about Justin Lichter, sometimes known as Trauma? Have you heard of this hiker?
I believe I listened to your podcast.
No, actually, I never interviewed Justin yet. He's on my list. I'm waiting for us to meet up physically, face to face. But I might have mentioned him at one point. But anyway, he's a guy who hiked. Well, he's done a lot of things, but the most impressive thing I think he did. He and a partner hiked the PCT in the winter. And now he is on the ski patrol in the Sierra Nevada, and so he probably has a lot of practical knowledge, probably not as much academic knowledge as, let's say, you have, but he has a lot of practical knowledge on how to avoid avalanches. And of course, he and his partner survived, and they actually did hike the PCT on the winter. But I imagine the last question I have is, if you're actually caught in an avalanche, I had mentioned earlier this whole idea of trying to swim to the top. Is that pretty much and then at the very end to try to keep your hands in front of your face to kind of create an air pocket once you stop flying down and also to protect your face, I suppose, but also so that it creates a little air pocket of breathing when you finally come to a stop. That's what I've read. Is there any other tips that people should be aware of if they're actually caught?
I mean, the key to all of that is figuring out which direction is up, and that can be tricky. And right, because I think, in general, as you feel yourself starting to go under, you really want to start fighting hard, and that try to stay afloat as much as possible. And then I agree, right at that moment, that you feel yourself stopping, really try to push out with your hands and try to create some space in front of your mouth.
Okay.
So, but I don't have personal experience with that because, as I said, I wasn't caught in a cold snow avalanche, and I also I didn't end up buried, but I can say that I didn't feel like I had a lot of control. And that's what I think is scary about an avalanche, is that you really don't have much control. The force of the slide is so much more powerful than your ability to generate force.
Right. I imagine it's just like a surfer. I don't surf, but I imagine that's the similar idea.
For me, it was like, class 4 whitewater.
Right. Yeah.
It's just so powerful.
You're powerless. Yeah. So surfer, or for the power of water, whether it's semi-frozen or frozen, whatever, or real, it's just overwhelming to our muscles and our power. It's very humbling for sure. And now for a 30-second commercial break regarding Tour Radar, our sponsor. They are a trusted online marketplace that helps you find, compare, and book multi-day tours that will help expand your travel horizons through life-enriching experiences. Just type in the region that you've always wanted to visit and your preferred travel style, and Tour Radar will do the rest. And right now, WanderLearn listeners can visit Tour Radar for a chance to win $1,000 in travel credits. Just go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn. That is tourradar.com/WanderLearn for your chance to win $1,000 in travel credits. And now back to the show. Okay, so the title of this whole podcast is How to Survive an Avalanche and Africa. So we've talked about the avalanche stuff, and now, Robert, I want to shift gears and talk about your experience in Africa. So tell the people a little bit about what you have done in Africa. By the way, before I want to, how much of the PCT, I forgot if you had done the whole PCT or not, or how much through hiking you had done.
Oh, I hiked the Great Himalayan Trail back in 2014. So that was part of a large Asian adventure just before the Peace Corps, actually.
Right. And describe what the Great Himalayan Trail is, because a lot of people may not know about it.
Yeah, it's much shorter than the PCT, but what it lacks in length, it makes up for in verticality. It is, I think, one of the most difficult through hikes in the world. It was designated as a route sometime around 2009, and it's still at least in 2014 it was still a little bit of a choose your own adventure in certain places, with a lot of route finding, asking directions in villages, things like that. It's often between, most of the route is between about 2,000 meters and 6,000 meters. So it really, on a given day, it's not uncommon to have 1,000 meters or about 4,000 feet of 4 to 5,000 feet, maybe 6,000 feet on a big day of elevation change. I did it from east to west, so it starts near the India border near Kanchenjunga, and it ends near Simikot in the northwest, near the Tibetan plateau, almost at Mount Kailash.
How many kilometers?
Off the top of my head, I'm not actually sure. I think it's,
or miles, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhere in the 1,000 to 1,500 range.
Okay.
Coming at it from the perspective of, I think, I didn't have the perspective of being a seasoned through hiker going into it, and so I didn't look at it as in the same way that, say, a PCT hiker might view it.
What do you mean by that? Explain.
Well, so I ran into a couple of folks who were more seasoned through hikers, and on the last few days of my journey, I was with them. They had maybe set a record in terms of speed, 54 days, and it took me about 80 days. But I did some of the technical passes, which added a lot of time. But I think the things that really set apart somebody who is a really experienced through hiker, they're gonna, particularly in the Himalayas, you've got to start early in the day to maximize your weather. They're also thinking, and I was thinking about this, was speed is in part a function of how much weight you're carrying, and so they just decided, we're going to choose a route that doesn't involve any technical mountaineering, and we're going to save a lot of logistics and a lot of weight in so doing, and we can move a lot faster. And they were also, they were hiking 13 to 14 hours a day regularly.
Right.
So yeah, there were certain things that, I went with a Nepali guide, and part of the decision, and actually a Czech friend of mine joined me for the first third of the route. But part of it was that the guide was a mountaineer. He wasn't a through hiker, and so yeah, we pushed ourselves, but sometimes weather got the best of us, and we had to, we started after breakfast, and it made, looking at the photos of these friends that I made who did the route, starting at 4 a.m. every morning, every pass they got to, it was sunny and clear. Most of the passes I got to, it was clouding up, and I was lacking the views. So, there's some tremendous lessons that I could learn from them, and they did a little gear shakedown with me, and they were like, you don't need a lot of these things that are in your packs. Like, you don't need a book, which I basically hadn't read.
Right.
Basic
so
things
tired at the end of the day. Right.
You think you might want, but in fact, your days are so big, and you're just not going to have the energy to read at the end of the day.
That's definitely true. Yeah, absolutely. It's exhausting, whether you're hiking 8 hours or 14 hours, either way, you're pretty spent at the end of the day. Now, but when you said some of the passes were technical, you mean that sometimes you had to have ropes and crampons and things like that with your guide?
Yeah. In the area of going from Makalu Base Camp to Everest Base Camp is a section of high passes. There are two passes over 6,000 meters separated by about just a few miles. And there's actually quite a story there. We were summiting these passes on the same day as a French couple, and they had a much larger team. We just had one guide, and so we combined forces on ropes. Our rope was not long enough to do the several 100-meter rappel that was probably the crux of the technical portion of the trip. And it was getting late in the day. They had a couple of porters, otherwise known as Sherpas in that part of the world, they'd basically used a bunch of their rope and ours to create several rappel lines down the steep ice and rock face, and then they'd scrambled off the bottom, which was it was technically non-technical, but it was close to being technical. And this French woman, I don't know if she rappelled off the end of her rope or whether she slipped while down climbing just after the end of the rope, but she flew off the rock and landed in the snow. And I don't know. To me, that was she's very lucky that she survived. She shattered at least one of her legs, and they initiated a very difficult air rescue the next day. So,
wow, that's amazing. And so you saw it actually happen?
I did. I was up at the top, shivering in the cold, and I mean, it was so far below me. I didn't, I saw it happen, but I didn't get a great view of it.
Right.
I knew something was incredibly wrong, and my friend.
So then you had to down climb at that point, because not only to help her, but also to get out of the freezing cold.
Well, I rappelled, but I did so very gingerly because we could tell that she was in harm's way. There was the potential for rocks to fall down the slope or chunks of ice. And when we all got down there, she had we all carried her into her tent. But yeah, it was a grave situation. And I think it really speaks to the incredible skill that these helicopter operators now have, and they were able to stage in this pretty remote location at 6,000 meters. They were able to stage a rescue and kind of swap helicopters in such a way that they were able to, basically haul her out.
That's amazing. And you witnessed those helicopters coming in? Yes,
I did. We tried to help the team in whatever way we could, but it was we were almost out of food, so we basically had enough fuel to boil some water for that team, and then we witnessed the helicopters. The first attempts were unsuccessful, and they ended up having to come back the next day, and they staged, and we went to the staging area. Where they brought in somebody to lower down with the what's the term for it? It's like the cadaver, but it's not a cadaver. She was alive. I mean the encased,
the stretcher. It's like
the stretcher. Yeah. They brought the stretcher, and then they packaged her up, and another helicopter came back, picked her up, and so. And they actually offered the helicopter offered our guide a ride out. Of course, he couldn't actually leave because he was with us. But my friend ended up coming down with pneumonia the next day, and we had another pass to cross, and we had a little bit of a hard time ourselves. quite a hard time, as a matter of fact. So, yeah,
And
you know,
and what happened? Did you just descend down instead of going over that pass? You just went down to the next village?
we didn't have that option. Our only exit routes were over
A pass.
high passes, and so we, you know, I asked my friend. Well, he said I don't. He got up and he started moving, and he said, "I don't think I can do this today." And I said, "What? You can't do this today?" I mean, it was kind of like we didn't have an option, so I said, "Let's try." And he moved about 100 meters, and he said, "I can't do it."
This was your Czech friend, I think?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
And I had actually just myself, I was just recovering from pneumonia. So it was a pretty rough, I didn't realize I had pneumonia at the time, but I had the worst cough of my life and was, you know, had bloody sputum. I mean, it was terrible. Anyway, an Italian.
And you had no food. You had no food at this point, correct?
We had 1 day's worth of food.
And you needed about 2 or 3 days to get out?
We only needed 1 day to get over this pass, so
But he wasn't willing to go that day.
Yeah, he physically couldn't.
And
so,
usually Czech guys, I mean, Eastern Europeans in general, are pretty tough. And so if he says no, that means really no.
He's tough. Yeah, he's a tough guy, and I respected what he was saying. So we thought about, you know, I had a personal locator beacon. We thought about, do we send a message and try to get a helicopter rescue? But I was concerned. We were in Nepal. I didn't know how the systems work, who was going to look for us, because once you commit to a rescue, you're supposed to stay in the same place, and we didn't have enough food, and so.
How much does the rescue helicopter, like that French woman who broke her leg, how much do you think she had to pay for that helicopter rescue? $5,000?
I would guess it's more. I would guess 25 to 30, because there were 2 helicopters.
No, it can't be that high. I mean, I guess it is high altitude, but I don't think it can't be $20,000. Anyway, who knows? If you don't know, we don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm in touch with them. I could get you an answer potentially.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just curious how much that, I mean, because she probably didn't have insurance to cover for that kind of rescue, maybe. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's different in North America where our governments, if it's not, my friend was evacuated from a ski traverse in Canada this year. He got strep throat and didn't think he could make it out. And the Canadian government covers the expenses, and they make the decision that
if that guy wasn't Canadian, if he was a Czech guy, he would have made it out.
Yeah.
These North Americans, we're just a bunch of pussies. It's really true. But the Eastern Europeans, if you put a Latvian guy, a Russian guy, whatever, they'll just, I've only chopped off one leg. I've still got my other leg. I can still make it.
I won't generalize, but yeah, yeah, in that case, I was encouraging my friend to try to make it out of his own volition, but you know.
But anyway, and you said they're the Canadian government, God bless their souls, that they can actually cover the whole thing. But anyway, getting back to Nepal. So you were trying to wrap up that story. You had your Czech guy who had pneumonia. You thought about, okay, I could launch my personal locator beacon, send out a signal, but then then we don't have enough food to stay in one place. It might take him 3 days to get here, and maybe in a day he will feel better, and we can get over the mountain on our own volition, and we won't have to pay this $20,000 bill or whatever multi-$1,000 bill. All these thoughts were going through your head, and so in the end, what happened?
Yeah, so we ended up we tried to send some text messages to a friend of my guide, Nimadawa, and we got no response. So, but we did see a party coming up the valley who had gone over a different pass to get in, to the region that we were in. And so they were Italians with a bunch of Nepali guides and porters, and they offered to help us stage a higher camp and help feed us for the night and provide us warm food and such. And we accepted. Nimadawa and I carried the contents and pack of my Czech friend, and we staged the high camp. We kind of got him a little bit rejuvenated, and then the next day we had, what should have been a moderately difficult day became an extremely difficult day for my friend. But we got him over the pass. We got down to the other side, and I think that's one of the most challenging parts of a journey when you're at your limit. Our communication kind of broke down, because in my head, if we go another 5 to 10 kilometers of flat walking, we're at a village with a tea house, a warm fire, hot food. At this point, we don't have any food ourselves, and he wanted to spend the night out. Once he'd crossed the pass, he was like, "I'm done." And so my guide and I, we basically didn't give him an option not to continue. We said, we're going. We have to get here. And at the time, we got to the guest house, and I remember I said something that triggered him, and he started yelling at me. So, it was I think when you're really stressed to the limits, even good friends, you have these moments that are tough.
Yeah. But at that point, did he jump off the trail completely, or did he recover and then eventually continue on with you?
He only had a month. So we got him to medical care. Actually, Nimadawa and I continued for another 5 days without him. He hiked down to Lukla and flew out to Kathmandu. Nimadawa and I did the next section of the trail called the Roll Walling, and then we bussed to Kathmandu to meet him there in Kathmandu and spend a few days, recuperate, and then we returned to the trail. So. Oh,
really? Wow. Okay. So you did go back. You had a nice little 0 day or two in there.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, we had a few 0 days, and we actually skipped maybe 2 days of hiking, just because of the bus route. So I technically can't say that I completed the trail, but in my mind they were a couple of kind of inconsequential days.
Yeah, I understand. Now, I was talking with my friend Sym. In fact, he's one of the most popular podcasts that I have on the WanderLearn-Podcast is the one with Sym Blanchard, he was a 66-year-old or 65-year-old adventurer. And he told me that after he'd been to Nepal, he stopped bringing his cameras on his travels, or to stop taking photos. He's kind of exaggerating, but he said it's because nothing else in the world compares to the beauty of Nepal. So he's just like, it's not even worth pulling out my camera anymore. How do you think about that?
He's not wrong, but yeah, I mean, I think with Nepal, it's this. It's this combination of incredible scenery with incredible culture. You have stunning vistas, people from varied cultures, that are often in your photos, with just these gorgeous alpine villages, to kind of, and so, yeah, I don't think there's been another place in the world outside of the Himalayas where you have such great opportunities for people, village, and alpine photography in one place.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's on my list. I will go there at one point. And now you just encouraged me to do the Great Himalayan Route there. I'll put it on the list. I've never been to Nepal, so it's definitely on the list. I got to go there before my legs get too worn out and used up. So now the podcast name has changed. It's now How to Survive an Avalanche, Nepal and Africa.
It's evolving quickly.
Exactly. Well, somehow we'll get to. We've gone over an hour already, and we're gonna have to get to Africa. So I wanna end with that. And now for a 30-second commercial break regarding Tour Radar, our sponsor. They are a trusted online marketplace that helps you find, compare, and book multi-day tours that will help expand your travel horizons through life-enriching experiences. Just type in the region that you've always wanted to visit and your preferred travel style, and Tour Radar will do the rest. And right now, WanderLearn listeners can visit Tour Radar for a chance to win $1,000 in travel credits. Just go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn. That is tourradar.com/WanderLearn for your chance to win $1,000 in travel credits. And now, back to the show. And so tell me a little bit about your Africa experiences, because you've done several trips and several things there in Africa, Robert.
Yep. So I joined the Peace Corps, actually accepting my invitation. Actually, oddly enough, the reason that I ended up leaving the trail, the Great Himalayan Trail.
Which trail? Okay. Mm-hmm.
When I did was... going to Kathmandu, I needed to accept my Peace Corps invitation because I had quit my job with the promise of not quite the promise, but banking on joining the Peace Corps, which at the time was a rather prolonged process to get into. And so,
how long did it take to get into the Peace Corps from the moment you decided to apply to the moment you were accepting it? Approximately about a year?
It was somewhere between 6 and 9 months.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it was about the average amount of time. I think that's changed a lot. It's the Peace Corps that the Peace Corps that I'm describing. Applying in 2013 for a position, or 2014, and being a volunteer from late 2014 up to the beginning of 2017. Volunteers who arrived even a year or two after, a couple of years after me, they accepted a very specific position. But at the time, the Peace Corps was very much sort of go with the flow of whatever comes your way, and
right.
And that's what it had been since its inception. So
you're saying that now in 2019 or so, that people are or even by the time when you were going there, they were more specific oriented. They're not so loosey goosey.
That's my understanding. Is that, and I haven't looked into this a lot, but if you go to the Peace Corps website now, you can look at very specific jobs in very specific countries, and you're effectively applying for a job within an overarching program. Like you might be applying for health, but within health you might be working at a specific health center doing a specific type of research, or probably not research, but a specific type of work at that health center. So the idea is that to meet the need for trained men and women, they can do it better if you're treating it like a job than if you're coming in and kind of you're a jack of all trades. And the Peace Corps says, well, we have college-educated Americans coming in, and they can learn how to do whatever they need to do.
Right. The challenge with that is that, having visited all the African countries, I just know that in a lot of low-income countries, there's a lot of fluidity in the environment, and so what might be needed when they have to identify these posts. Let's say they have to think about a year ahead of time. And then by the time that comes, things may have changed and needs may have changed. And so I got to believe that the Peace Corps has to retain a certain amount of flexibility in those posts. So yeah, in theory, you go there for the specific job and maybe 80% of the applicants actually do the job that they were hired to do. But I got to imagine that a certain percentage of the applicants are forced through the market conditions to change and adapt, because that's just the way a lot of low-income countries work.
I would assume that the training is still similar and it's still broad. And so if you're trained, for my case, I was in education, and we had, literacy training. We had instruction as in the classroom. We got classroom experience, which I didn't have previously, or I had, it was limited to TAing as a graduate student for undergrads, and then there was there was a lot of training that I would say for me was a little bit less necessary about just survival in a developing country. As you can tell, I'd spent time in Nepal and various other parts of Asia, but for a lot of people, survival in a foreign environment, particularly an African country, Americans can be targets, and finding ways to keep a low profile and also to navigate are important skills. So,
right. And by the way, for the people who are listening to this, they should understand that the Peace Corps, even though it's populated mostly by young people in their 20s, it is open to all ages. In fact, I've met Peace Corps people who are in their 70s, who are, just starting and do their 2 years of service in their 70s. So you can, and I've met people in their 50s, 60s, whatever. So it's open to anybody who wants to get involved. So you got accepted. You went to Kathmandu. You said yes. You clicked on your yes button or whatever you had to do to approve. And then you were sent off to Uganda?
Yes. 6 months later, in November 2014, I got on a plane, went off to Uganda with a cohort of 37 folks. How
many of those 37 folks ended up graduating? 30?
I think we lost about 6 over the
so was close.
over the course of the 27 months. To a variety of reasons. Yeah,
sure. So continue. So then you were you landed in Kampala, which is the capital of Uganda, and from there you were shuttled off to a village somewhere?
Yeah, we landed in Entebbe, which is the airport near Kampala, and
it's right on the Lake Victoria.
Yeah, right off on basically an isthmus into Lake Victoria, so it basically I was placed in southwest Uganda at a primary school, and I was in one location for about 2/3 of my service, and oftentimes, I wouldn't say oftentimes, but probably in about a quarter, maybe somewhere between a quarter and 50% of people end up getting a site change at some point in their service due to a variety of potential reasons that might occur. I shifted, and so I went from a very agricultural community into a community that was entirely surrounded by an African game or safari park called Queen Elizabeth National Park.
Yeah, I've actually been there, so that's why I remember that. Okay, that's near Mbarara or whatever it's called.
So Mbarara is the second largest,
the big city,
city in the southwest of Uganda, and then I was originally in the deep southwest, and then if you travel up the road towards the Rwenzori Mountains or Fort Portal, you go through Queen Elizabeth National Park, and my site was right on that road.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Because I remember going around there, and I also you probably didn't hike up the Rwenzori Mountains to the top of Margarita Peak, I imagine, but maybe you did.
I did as a matter of
fact. You did?
Yeah.
dude, I love that hike. That's like, to me, my favorite hike in Africa, for sure.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. Everybody goes up Kilimanjaro. Did you do Kilimanjaro too?
I did not.
Okay, yeah. So you're not missing much. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, you did the better of the two hikes. Margarita Peak, which is sometimes called Mount Stanley, is the third tallest mountain in Africa. It's about 52 or 5,100 meters. I can't remember. 52, or I think it's 52. I think it's 5195 or something like that. But it's a pretty tall mountain and glacier filled. So what year did you do it, by the way?
2016. I think it was December.
My God, we were there around the same time, I swear. It was incredible. Did you see the ladder? I don't know if it was still there when you were there. There was a ladder that descended down to nowhere. In other words, did you see that ladder? I don't know if you remember. So basically,
on the Rocky summit?
About maybe 5-10 years ago, we were, to get to Margarita Peak, which is the tallest point on the mountain, they would traverse a glacier and then go down a ladder to get onto another glacier. And that ladder used to be only about, let's say, 3 meters tall. And then over time, it went to become like 30 meters tall. And eventually they just said, fuck it. We're just giving up because we're not going to make a super long ladder. We're just going to find another way around. But the ladder still's there. So you see kind of like...
I did see that. And
okay, yeah.
I didn't make the connection that it was actually going onto a glacier.
Because the glacier's gone now.
The glacier's gone. It's just on the rock, and there's rock above and below it, and it's like...
It doesn't... No, it's not even on the rock, dude. It's like it's just hanging in midair. It's hanging in midair because you didn't actually go on that ladder, did you? Right. So nobody does, because it starts from the top where you're actually on rock, and then it just goes on and it would land on a glacier. But since the glacier has receded, thanks to global warming, therefore it's just hanging in midair. And it's just, to me, a poster child
I might not have
global
seen it,
warming.
actually. Yeah. But,
okay. Anyway, you probably saw. Maybe it's touching rock. I don't know. Maybe it is touching rock. But I remember. I'm 85% sure that it was not. It was because I remember talking about it with my guide. I was like, dude, what is that thing just hanging in midair there? That ladder that goes to nowhere. And he explained to me that there was once a glacier there, and that's the way they used to take it, and now they don't take it anymore because they would have had to extend the ladder to a ridiculous level and to land on solid ground. So they just routed around it. Anyway, sorry. So now the weather in the Rwenzori Mountains, I think it's called rainmaker or something like that. Rwenzori means rainmaker or something like that in the local language there. But it's notoriously wet. And except for like the month of January or February, around that time when it's relatively dry. But what month did you go?
It was December. So
okay, so then you actually hit the dry weather, the dry season. So how dry was it? Not that dry.
We actually had decent weather.
Okay,
I believe it rained the first day, and then
all right.
Yeah, it actually wasn't too bad.
So for those listening, if you're ever thinking about copying Robert and I and going up this mountain, which I highly recommend, and I think you do too, is that go to when Rob went. I didn't go. I went. I can't remember what month I did. It could have been August or something like that. It was not in the optimal season, but I lucked out. There were some Germans who were ahead of me. They were coming down the mountain as I was coming up the mountain, and they told me they saw 0 on the summit. It was all, and most of the days that they were there, it was like a lot of very little visibility. And I lucked out. I just got a nice weather window where I had huge views the whole time. But in your case, I think you had some great views as well because you went there in the right time.
I did. I didn't get a great view into the DRC, which would have been nice, but because the border
on the summit, what happened? On the summit, it was cloudy.
There were clouds on the DRC side. Yeah. I mean, actually, if you can get a weather window during the rainy season, that's when you have the best visibility because there's so much particulate matter in the air in that part of Africa that actually it was. The neat thing about where I was living is that I could actually, on a really clear day, I could actually see the snow of the Rwenzoris from my very hot community in the Rift Valley. So I was around 1,000 meters, and it would be those days in the rainy season where you could where you could really see it. But it was clear enough. I actually climbed Speak or Spec. I don't.
Yeah, Speak. Yeah, it's named after the explorer. I think his name is Jonathan Speak or something like that.
Yep. Before the day before I did Margarita.
Speak was the guy who I think said that Lake Victoria is the source of the Nile, the main source of the Nile.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the one who, he had an argument with some other guy. I forgot his name. And Speak won that fight. And he managed to, of course, he didn't really know it. Nobody did at the time. But he took the stance that Lake Victoria was the main source of the Nile. And his buddy or whatever, his rival, should I say, was denying that. And in the end, history proved Speak right. But anyway, sorry, we go back. How many other countries did you go to in Africa, Robert?
Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Madagascar. Technically, I stepped over to the border into South Sudan and the DRC.
I technically did the same thing. I actually climbed the tallest mountain of South Sudan, so I technically was in South Sudan, but it's near the Uganda border, and I sneaked in. I didn't have a visa or anything like that, so I didn't. I did a few more than just. I didn't just step into the border.
I literally just stepped over to say I did, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but yeah, I went all the way to the tallest mountain, which was another story. But we'll not get into that. In those experiences, what, Robert, do you think is the thing that kind of took you a while to learn about the parts of Africa that you visited? You know, things that were not intuitive, things that were shocking, things that surprised you from your experience in Africa, that it took you, let's say, a month to learn or more.
I guess the thing that took me some time to get my head around, and it's still something that I struggle with today, is that, you know, there are certain values that that I like to think that we hold as fundamental values in our society, and one of the biggest ones I would say is honesty. And I think, you know, that honesty is a very flexible value in Africa, and I think, you know, you could say that potentially about a lot of the developing world, but I think it's even more flexible as a value in a lot of Africa. And, you know, that it makes it challenging as a traveler, but it really makes relationship building difficult when you're working on the ground and you're dealing with people that you want to call your friends, but you just can't quite trust them. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a Peace Corps volunteer faces, is to figure out who you can really trust, and then on top of that, who actually wants to work with you. Because there may be people who come out of the woodwork and express interest early on because they see a white person, they see, oh, you know, this is going to be profitable for me because this person might have money, they might have connections for me. But you know, there are gonna be people who want to work with you, potentially for that reason, but also because they want something good for the community, and they see somebody who has the time and the energy to help with that. And so, yeah, a lot of, you know, I can say with my first site that, you know, I wasted months working with people that didn't want to work with me, and they didn't really have. They had a selfish vision rather than a grander vision, and so. But the neat thing is that when you do find those people to work with, that you know, it's some of the most fulfilling work of your life, and that's why people often describe Peace Corps as a kind of an emotional roller coaster, because you have these days where you're interacting with people who are really passionate about what they do. They come from disadvantaged circumstances in some cases, and they are going the extra effort to work on these projects that may or may not directly benefit them, right? And, you look at your life in the U.S. or another developed country, for instance, and, you see a lot of people not willing to volunteer their time at all, right? And, or, they might not host a random stranger or, feed a random stranger. There are just these barriers, and you find, and I think this is true throughout the developing world. You find that in some of these communities, there are customs that if you have a stranger, for instance, in Uganda, you cook a little extra food, and so you if you have enough means, and fortunately for Uganda, bananas grow on trees and in good quantity. So frequently a family will cook enough for an extra meal or two. And at first it bothered me. Well, why are you cooking all this extra food that's just going to go to waste? But it goes to the ruminants, it goes to the pigs, and I think it, the overall cycle of that food is productive.
Right. What about, what you said was so fascinating about the fluidity of something that's truthful or not. Now, obviously, in the United States, there's also fluidity in truthfulness, and I'm sure you agree with this too. An example is, let's say you ask 100 of your friends and say, hey, what do you think about I just grew out my beard. And I'm sure 80% of your friends are going to say, hey, I love it, Robert. You have a nice beard. And then if you cut your beard off and shave it completely, and you ask 100 friends, 80% will say, yeah, you look great without a beard. It looks nice, clean shaven. So in other words, indicating that our notion of honesty and being truthful is fluid in a sense, because we do quote unquote white lies all day long. And we do that as part of society to keep relations and all that other stuff. But you're right that in Africa, it's just at a whole nother level. It's just way more, you can call it lying or whatever it is, but it makes it very hard, I think, to, like you say, set up relationships with people, to work with people, because when somebody says, I'll have it ready by Tuesday, they may never have it ready by Tuesday. It might be the Tuesday next month is what they're talking about. Or it's just, if somebody says, yeah, I want to work for you, I love it, yeah. And then, of course, they don't show up the next day when you tell them, hey, okay, we'll be here by 8 a.m. And they show up at noon. I'm like, okay, well, I'm here at noon. What's the big deal? And this shit happens all the time. And to me, some people blame a lot of the African problems on colonialism and that kind of stuff. And I don't think the colonialists taught Africans this value or this way of interacting with each other, or that's a consequence of that colonization, because that culture, I don't think existed in the 18th, 19th century as much as it does. When the colonialists came, the colonialists were people who got their shit together because they came all the way from far away. So I'm sure there was, and they came there. I don't think they learned that value, but we have to recognize that Africans often have, and again, it's a generalization, obviously, but that they have a value. And why does the African continent suffer economically? Why do they struggle? Well, a lot of it's that it's hard to run a business when you can't trust your partner, and you give them a loan, or the guy says, I'm going to buy 10 mangoes from you tomorrow, and he doesn't buy 10 mangoes from you tomorrow. It's hard to get anything fucking done in that kind of society. It's just really difficult. And to blame everything on the evil white guy is just ludicrous, I think, because yes, obviously some things have to do with the evil white guy, but a lot of things is just internal problems, internal things that they've brought onto themselves through their own values. And it's politically incorrect to say that, but I'm going to say it in my book, and I'm going to say it in my podcast, and I'm going to say it over and over again to say, you know what? A lot of the problems are the Africans' fault. And by the way, one last thing on my little diatribe here is that if you talk to Africans about Africa, a lot of times they themselves will be the first to admit that they're fucked up because their own values, because of their societies, because they tolerate the leaders that they have, because their village chief is corrupt, or on and on. Because every level of society has problems. And they're much less prone to blame the evil white guy than the white people are to blame. The foreigners are much more, we like to self-flagellate ourselves and like say, it's all our fault, it's all our fault. But the Africans themselves are more likely, I think, in my experience, I don't know about your experience, to say, you know what, we're screwed up because, well, we're screwed up.
Yeah, I would say that's generally true. Colonialism is a pretty complex topic because, it occurred before almost anyone's or most of the people that I interacted with don't really remember it. And
of course not. Yeah, of course not. Yeah, I mean, it's the average life expectancy in Africa is around 55 years old or so. And so it's certainly in the villages, it doesn't reach much more than that. And then independence of most African countries was over about 60 years ago. So it's just do the math. They didn't see it.
Right. So people in general, I think they do struggle running businesses, as you mentioned, and in general, they would blame issues within their culture, but I think a lot of the problems originate from potentially, like I found actually there were certain cases in Uganda where it was very difficult for me not to lie because of strict societal structure or strict
Give me an example.
Values.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, let me give an example. I let's say I was out late at night, and I was coming home to the compound where I was living in southwest Uganda. I was living with an upstanding family, members of the church. But maybe I didn't want them to know who I was visiting, for instance. And so I might be questioned in the morning. We heard the dogs barking when you came through the fence into our compound. Where were you? And so I might say, oh, I was visiting my Peace Corps friend, and I didn't tell them the exact truth. So that's sort of the example that I would one of the many examples that because it just wasn't worth. I knew the opinion that I would get
Right.
if I told the truth, and so it was worth telling a white lie and not having that argument.
I had a similar, my little anecdote that just jumped into my mind is when I was in Benin. I just got into this habit which all the Africans would do. A lot of the Africans, I shouldn't say all the Africans, but a lot of Africans would do is that they would declare that they're at some place, a meeting point, even though they're not there. So I would say, hey, well, let's meet at this restaurant. And then I would have some girl who say, okay, I'm there. I'm like, what do you mean you're there? Where are you? Because I'm looking around this restaurant and you're not here. I'm like, and then all of a sudden I step outside. I'm sitting there. I'm like, yeah, I'm there. And I'm sitting out in the street and I see her come up on a motorcycle about 5 minutes later. But she's declaring that she's there. So then all of a sudden I got into the habit of when I'd get on the motorcycle taxi to go to the meeting point, let's say to the village square. And I know it's going to take me about, let's say, 6 minutes. I call the person and say, hey, I'm there already. Because I did the same shit that they always do to me. So because I know that because a lot of Africans, they will not move until until they know that you're already there. You tell them, let's meet at the village square. It's at 6. They'll say, yes, okay, meet you at 6. So then you get there at 6 and 6:05, 6:10, and you're like looking at them. And then you call them and says, dude, I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. Like, okay, I'll be right there. And then they finally getting out of their asses. They won't move until they know that you're there first. And then they'll move. And then they'll declare that they're there when they're not there.
Yeah, no, it's a problem, and it's a problem for organizing meetings, for instance. Because there's this hierarchical structure, the more important folks, they want to be the last ones to show up at the meeting, right? So then you have this problem where, they call in, is everyone there? Is everyone assembled? And, by the time that, the higher up actually shows up, some people have already left because, they're like,
I'll give you an example. When I was in Kampala, I can't remember the event. It was a tourism conference and stuff like that. And the president, Museveni or whatever that guy said, how do you pronounce his name? Museveni. Yeah, Museveni. He was coming to speak at 8 a.m. So of course we dutifully showed up like at 7:45 to hear the 8 a.m. speech of the president of Uganda. And guess what? He shows up at 10. So he has like 1,000 people, or maybe 2,000 people. I can't remember how many thousands, maybe 3,000. I can't remember. Anyway, it was a big fucking room, huge room. And guess what? He shows up at 10. Now, maybe Bill Clinton. I know Bill Clinton was kind of famous for being late for a lot of meetings. But anyway, the general point remains. Yes, you're right that in important meetings, the important guy shows up very late. It's very frustrating. What other things, by the way, Robert, did you that were kind of like head scratchers for you in Africa, or at least Uganda? How about male-female relations? And by the way,
yeah.
I mean, sorry, before I interrupt you here, but one of the things that you kind of mentioned, about the whole lying thing. Some people might be listening to this and saying to themselves, well, maybe, Robert, you were lied to more than the average person because you're the foreigner, you're the Mzungu. And so therefore, Africans have a tendency to lie more to the foreigner than they would lie to themselves because they can see through each other's bullshit. But do you think that's true, or do you think that you weren't getting lied to much more than anybody else was being lied to?
I mean, maybe I was being lied to in different ways, but I definitely saw plenty of times when, Ugandans would be talking to each other, they would be communicating, and they would say, they would even be telling each other, I'm in your town or something, and when in fact they were across the country, and it was just like, it's like I don't really understand the point of it, and it's like, so I can't say that it was exclusively or in any way more directly towards me, but it was probably potentially the lies were probably more often designed with a specific purpose than sort of just it's a game. I felt like in some cases with Ugandans it was it was part of the games that they play with each other.
Right. Well, it's not just Ugandans, dude. It's so much of the sub-Sahara is like that, and it's prevalent. That's what things that shocked me is just I expected more differentiation, but I saw that stuff over and over and over and over again in different countries, different cities, villages, everything. It's just it was surprising to me. Okay, so what other things surprised you, by the way?
Yeah, I would say one of the things is that in Uganda in particular, and I can't speak as much to the other countries I visited. There are a lot of there are very strict gender roles, as there are in a lot of African countries, and women are very much expected to be subservient to men and to cook, and I think you talked about this on one of your podcasts was the degree of infidelity, which is incredibly high. I would say maybe unlike the women in Tanzania, it seemed to be probably higher among men than women in Uganda. But
right. Well, that interview that you heard from Tanzania, I disagreed with that woman, that the women were more unfaithful. She was declaring that women were more unfaithful than men. And I disagreed with her, but I respect her opinion. She's Tanzanian, so what the fuck do I know? But my wife, who's African, she disagreed. Now, granted, not from Tanzania. My wife is from Cameroon. So, but anyway, continue. So you're saying that in Uganda, the men have a tendency to be less faithful than the women.
Yeah, and they have so much more freedom, right? The woman, if the woman is not at home cooking when the man gets back, and if there's not a meal prepared, some Ugandan men might beat their wife, and so there's this sort of gender-based violence that is kind of accepted more than it. Well, I mean, it shouldn't be accepted at all, but it is accepted within the society. That these are the expectations of the role of a female, and if she doesn't perform them, she deserves to be beaten. That's sort of one of these expectations, I think. And then, this double standard that, if she then goes out and talks to a man, she's probably sleeping with him and being unfaithful, and then she would also get beaten. So, there are all these... Yeah, and I think in Uganda more so than any other country that I visited, the traditional values around that are very strict, because Christianity is so ingrained in a lot of the culture, and it's a more extreme form of Christianity than I saw, for instance, in Madagascar, where it's much more fluid and flexible and kind of interwoven with traditional values, traditional beliefs, and animistic cultures. So yeah, and that strictness goes into the dress codes. Women in Uganda are expected to wear dresses. Men are expected to look smart. Smart being the British English for, they're expected to, wear a well-ironed shirt and pants, and I shouldn't say pants, because in Uganda that pants are actually underpants.
Right.
So
trousers.
Trousers.
Yeah, no, it's funny.
Yeah.
I remember when I met my wife. This is actually before I met my wife. We met online, but I was going to our first date. The first time we actually were going to see each other, we're going to go to an event in Cameroon, in the capital, Yaoundé, and it was going to be a tourism conference, and it was a tourism event, and so it was kind of semi-formal. And so I told her, I said, do not come here in shorts, like I can't remember. I said to her, wear pants. It's conservative, or something like that. And so she was just like, what do you mean? This guy's perverted. Why is he telling me to come in pants? Of course I'm going to wear pants. I'm like, what does it matter whether I'm wearing pants or not? Because she's thinking panties. For her, it was trousers. So I'm like this complete perverted white guy saying, I want you to wear your sexiest pants. Yeah, no, it's very true. There's so many things to talk about, Robert, but we have to wrap it up because it's getting closer to our 2 hour mark. But I wanted to get a sense from you. If the Peace Corps is something that you feel is doing overall, is worth our tax dollars. Is it, when you look back on that experience, obviously, I imagine most people enjoyed it from their perspective, but is it actually making change? Because one argument, Peace Corps was invented by JFK in the 60s. And you look at Africa, and yes, there's been tremendous progress in Africa, no doubt about it. And Bill Gates, I think, has done a lot of good documentation. Many other people have documented how much progress there has been made. But the question is that, at the same time, much of Africa is still far behind the rest of the world and the other continents. So some people will say, well, is the Peace Corps doing any good? Or not any good, but should I say, is it worth it? What do you think?
I would say yes. I would say relative to if there's going to be any aid at all. And I think that's the question that I think deserves debate, because if there's any aid at all, Peace Corps is a low cost and relatively effective way of transferring knowledge in a way that empowers people to kind of improve their own lives and their own communities. That's not to say that I think that every Peace Corps volunteer is effective. It's not even to say that I think that I was as effective as I could be, but I think that it gave me a way to get into a community, and it gave me a way to work with, ideally, people who wanted to work with me, and it took me some time to figure that out, who those people were, and some luck of landing in a community that wanted to be worked with, ultimately. But essentially, when I look at the other forms of aid, I look at them oftentimes as they're giving things of high monetary value to the communities, and I think one of the challenges that Africa faces is that oftentimes at this point in the growth trajectory, the technology and the and a lot of the and healthcare are actually outpacing sort of the ground roots development of the society. And what that leads to is, if you it leads, one of the things it leads to is tremendous population growth. But yeah, I think there's an imbalance there. And I think, like, if you look at, quote, Western or developed countries, usually those countries developed organically with the technology of the time. And, so yeah, I think that, there's kind of there's no going back on it at this point. I mean, we live in a globalized world. Technology is going to come in, but some of that aid and some of that infrastructure that's sort of being forced onto to societies is absolutely good for life expectancy. But yeah, it's ultimately going to lead to imbalances, and so. Yeah, I don't know that there's an easy solution, because nobody wants to deny healthcare to people, and so I think what's happening is probably it's an experiment that's going to play out, and there are going to be major challenges within the society that governments are having to deal with, like huge unemployment rates and things like that, and that's going to result in political instability. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and a lot of times I go back and forth on this question. Sometimes I get wildly optimistic about Africa. I think about some of the progress it's made. And on the other hand, I look at kind of like the demographic time bomb that they're creating. The fact that, yes, although fertility rates have been dropping, a lot of, like you're kind of alluding to, this idea that the mentality of having lots of children hasn't changed that much. So now all of a sudden they're more successful at having lots of children, and yet for a society to kind of advance quickly, you don't want to have an excessive amount of children. To have 5-6 children is too much for society to kind of absorb if there's not the job creation engine behind it. And how can you have a job creation engine when you have a society that doesn't trust each other, like they often don't do, and some of the problems that we talked about before? So that makes it difficult. So all of a sudden you have this vast unemployment because nobody wants to start a lot of people don't want to start a company. To start a company is very hard and challenging. To be an entrepreneur and to build a business, you need to be able to depend on the government. You need to be able to depend on other people, your suppliers, your customers, that they'll pay their bills, that the suppliers will supply your goods and your raw materials when you're going to need them. On and on. You just need that trust in order to build up a society. And Scandinavia is like the polar opposite of Africa in so many ways, not just the weather. It's the fact that there's a lot more trust in that society. It's a lot easier to like get things going there. And that's something that's so endemic in Africa, and they really have to. It's a chicken and egg problem. Like, how do you get over that? And like you say, there's this issue of having so many children. You have to build up infrastructure. You have to build up schools, hospitals, roads, internet, etc., to help give the tools for that young generation coming up. But if they don't have it, and then there's one last thing that you didn't mention, which is the onset of AI and the onset of automation here, because instead of moving to low-cost labor places, and there's a hope among Africans that low-cost labor will move from Southeast Asia and East Asia all the way to Africa, because now China is becoming more and more expensive, so maybe they'll look to Africa to manufacture stuff. But with AI and with automation, maybe the jobs will actually come back to the United States, because we can just build robots here at home and just have the robots do it. I'll have the AI operate here. We don't need the African cheap labor. And then what the fuck are the Africans going to do? It's a real headache.
Yep. Yeah, no, it is a challenge. And I have one more comment about, the fertility rates and stuff like that, which is, and going back to this question of what surprised me, and I remember having conversations with people where, some Ugandans, I believe foolishly, they compare themselves to their former colonial power of Great Britain, and they say, well, Great Britain has 100 million people, and they're the size of Uganda. Shouldn't we have 36 million or 37 million people? Why don't we just keep producing babies, and why don't we have this, we'll become great like them. And, it to me, Great Britain didn't develop a population of 100 million people overnight. It gradually increased, it industrialized, it found ways of, doing some really, intensive agriculture, and other mechanized things that enable people to live comfortably, or relatively comfortably, and even that said, the livelihoods of Britons might be a lot better if they had a third as many people. So
Right. And speaking about a third, so for those British people listening to this and say, we don't have 100 million people, we only have 66 million. I think Robert is just talking in generality. Yeah. Just the idea that they need to catch up to, because Uganda's population is definitely lower than the UK's. I'm not sure maybe it's like 20 to 30 million Uganda. I'm not sure exactly, but it's definitely not. It's about half the size. Okay, yeah. So it's about half the size of the UK. They're former British. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, the fertility rates are dropping for sure, but there's so much. It's a real challenge with Africa to know where to actually start. Where if I were president of a country in Africa, I'd be like, whoa, I don't know where to start. It's a long process, but let's hope. That's all they can do. Well. Thank you so much. We have a million. I could keep talking to you for another hour easily, because we've just scratched the surface of some of your experiences. We didn't talk about Madagascar. We didn't talk about Ethiopia, and on and on and on. But we'll say that for a future podcast. Now, last thing before we go, you want to give me a plug. You're working with an organization, I think, right now in Uganda that you want to potentially plug. Can you go ahead and talk about that briefly?
Yeah, the Kazinga Channel Schools Project
I'll link to that in the show notes, by the way. But to say it more slowly.
Kazinga Channel Schools Project. So my community was located on the Kazinga Channel, which within Queen Elizabeth National Park, there are two larger lakes, Lake Edward and Lake George, and there's a channel that runs between them, and there are a number of small communities that were allowed to continue their fishing existence when the park was gazetted some years ago. So these communities face unique challenges because they don't have agriculture. Fishing is often it's viewed as a sort of a never-ending resource, and as a result, it ends up leading to some vices that usually result in communities with higher HIV rates and certain challenges. So these communities for southwestern Uganda, I would say they're on the underdeveloped side. So my Peace Corps counterpart, who is really great, his name is Ramadan, like the holiday, and another Peace Corps counterpart who has my same English name, Robert. The two of them founded the Kazinga Channel Schools Project with the idea of taking a set of environmental and educational practices, often that at least the educational practices are things that they learned through their interaction with the Peace Corps, to try to improve educational outcomes and, in general, community outcomes. And so it's an organization that's quite small. It's run by these two volunteers. I'm a board member, and I'm trying to gradually build it up to a point that it can be really self-sustaining. At the moment, it runs off of about $300 a year, which is my annual gift to it. But we're looking at growing the organization. I think it's proven to be successful for high impact for the minimal amount of money that it has, doing reusable menstrual pad projects, which give young girls an opportunity to be in school for more days. A lot of Westerners don't think of menstruation as being an impediment to education, but in a society where you're afraid that your friends are going to know that you're menstruating, or that where that is sort of a very taboo topic. It can be incredibly difficult. And then while I was a Peace Corps volunteer, we built a library in the school. There are goals to get more literary resources into some of these communities that are further from the main road, and then their environmental projects are kind of getting people excited about and knowledgeable about the environment, because these are going to be the next stewards of Queen Elizabeth National Park, the people who are there, and they're the ones who are really interacting at the border of the park. There are often conflicts between the wild animals and domesticated animals, for instance. There are and that creates conflict between the Ugandan Wildlife Authority and the local communities. And so, the more the better educated these communities are, the better off the national park is going to be going into the future. So yeah, there are a number of projects, and I think at the moment I'm looking to try to sort of increase funding up to about $1,000 a year as we kind of as we kind of build and we continue to gradually continue to increase our ability to make an impact.
Excellent. Well, I hope somebody listening to this writes you $1,000 check, and that'll be done.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for all your time and all your stories about Africa, as well as the Himalayas, as well as avalanches. Wow, we covered a lot of topics. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I know you and I are connected on Facebook, but is there any other way that you like people connecting with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me via my email, robertshahn@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to me if you have connections to that part of the world. If you're interested in the kind of work that I'm doing there, there's even a small project in Madagascar that I got involved with, trying to conserve a literal forest by planting vanilla. But if we have another podcast in the future, we can talk about it. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. There's so much to talk about, and I will go ahead and post your Facebook profile on the show notes and the information that you've given to me as well. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Robert.
Thank you, Francis. It's been a pleasure as well.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn-Podcast, where we explore travel technology and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on the latest episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. Here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and want to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/, you guessed it, ftapon. That's where you can pick up some sweet rewards for as little as $1 a month. And remember, subscribing to the WanderLearn podcast helps, but downloading each episode helps even more. Please share the podcast, review it, and sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. This show was edited by Rejoice Tapon. The music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.